on to the first panel of the day. So if I could ask Elsa, Lily, Felix and Andy to unmute and we're going to step through them and introduce them and have a 30-minute chat about energy, submarine, fiber carrier, interconnect and issues relating to core networking. So let's go down the list. I can see Andy at the top. Andy, are you there?
Morning, Dom. Here I am. Good to see you.
Brilliant, and thank you for being one of our gold sponsors. I must remember to thank all our gold and platinum sponsors as they come on air today. So do you want to just give us a quick 30-second high view about what you do and what Seaborn do?
Absolutely. My name is Andy Bax, Chief Operating Officer of Seaborn Networks. We operate CDS2, which is a submarine cable between, predominantly between New York and Sao Paulo. Delivering not just capacity, but also IP bandwidth in both wholesale and enterprise space. We've got a total of 13 POPs spread between the US and Brazil, largely in Sao Paulo in Brazil. We're also POP in Rio as well. New Jersey and New York are our main POPs in the US, but we're also POPed in Ashburn, Jacksonville, and Miami, so up and down the East Coast. That's for transport services, and then we also deliver IP on both a wholesale and an enterprise basis too, both north and south up and down the cable. So it's cable's about 3 years old now. It's been in service for 3 years. Only direct cable between the two continents. So I'm just happy to be on the panel and looking forward to a good conversation.
Perfect, thank you, Andy. Excellent. Next on my list, I've got Elsa. Elsa Pine, are you out there?
I'm here, Don. How are you?
Fantastic. Great to see you again. You were a very enthusiastic participant in CDS last year, so it's great to have you back on the panel. How's it going with EdgeConneX? Tell us all.
Everything is quite busy. Quite busy. I'd say it's probably as bad, if not good, as post 9/11. It's been quite interesting. So, EdgeConneX is one of the leading wholesale providers for hyper-local to hyper-scale type data centers. We've built anywhere from the 20 kW to the 40 megawatt hyperscale facilities. And we're right now trying to solve a lot of re-architecture for a lot of our customers who are, trying to feed the edge, which the edge now is our homes, right? I mean, our new coworkers are our family, and our, 125 million people actually reside in our local markets, which is a good thing, but there's still not enough. But we're doing our best.
That's fantastic. Excellent. Right. Okay. And we've got Felix is the next on the list. Felix, are you out there?
I am, Dom.
Brilliant. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you guys are up to?
Absolutely. So I'm the general manager for NJFX, and NJFX is a tier 3 co-location cable landing station in Wall, New Jersey. So what we've done is we've revolutionized the passive CLS location model and created a marketplace hub with multiple subsea cables coming into our location. And we have multiple backhaul providers coming into that location, which allows for seamless connectivity both terrestrially and internationally across 3 separate continents. Seaborn, Andy, so the CROS cable comes into our campus along with a few others. So that's exactly what we do, and that's our model.
Perfect, excellent. We've got one more panelist to introduce. We've got Lily Yusupova. Are you out there?
Hi, I'm here, Dom. How are you?
Brilliant.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, welcome back. We had you join with Elsa last year as well, so it's very good to see you again. Do you want to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Schneider?
Sure. Lily Yusupova. I'm with Schneider Electric. I've been in the industry for around 15 years, and 8 of them with Schneider. We support our customers with energy management and infrastructure, and many of the panelists today are some of our customers, so we support them with their growth and their business, and this is definitely an opportunity to discuss how we can support our customers as we continue this great industry of growth.
Well, this is brilliant. So, as you guys know, this year I'm trying to sort of focus the morning sessions here on the underpinnings of CDN and the supply chain that creates CDNs and so on. And being very purist, if we work up the network stack before we even start with the physical layer, it's probably worth starting with the last panelist I introduced, Lily, and just talking a little bit about power. It's my sort of pet subject this year. We've, as mentioned earlier, Tim Siglin and myself have recently penned an article where we've been looking into the power demand that's being driven by particularly streaming across the ecosystem. Lily, do you have any view on this? Do you have a sense on how much power demand is being created by everything through the streaming ecosystem? And how are you guys dealing with the demand on that power?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a great demand on power. What we do for our customers is we support them with power that comes into that building. So the switch gear and all the equipment that helps get that power in. But there's obviously a great demand for power and power products. And the way we're doing that is we're really working with our customers and partnering with them. Understanding of, hey, what's going on with your personal, what is going on with your growth, and how can we help you? How do we position you? How do we pipeline you? And then obviously there's manufacturing behind it to support them with that growth. Overall, on an overall level globally, our company stands for reducing energy, making things more sustainable. So we focus on products that we try to bring out there that's going to make them more efficient, more sustainable, reduce cost to energy, and also provide availability to energy globally.
Perfect. And a question for Felix here. What role do you feel that the data center evolution is having in these power demands? And also, how do you manage choosing the location of data centers with regard to cable landing stations and access to metro networks and so on? Felix? Oh, I think he's muted. Hold on. Let's press the magic unmute button. Felix,
I'm not sure.
There
you go. Yeah, so obviously with the growing power demand, you're starting to see a lot of different ideas coming into the development of cable landing stations. One thing that what we're seeing in New Jersey is the acquisition of offshore wind farms. And you're starting to see renewable energy resources being extremely important. You see that in the Nordic regions, and the Nordic regions has long been a place where data center growth has been in high demand. You're still seeing that now, and it's because of their renewable, sustainable energy resources. And now you're starting to see that happening in the United States as well. New Jersey has been leading the way. The governor here has signed a massive agreement to start looking at offshore wind farms and using that energy as by 2035 for sustainable energy resources and growth demand across data centers. So yeah.
Perfect. And Elsa, last year we spoke a lot about the power demands at the edge and so on. So what are you seeing as changes in infrastructure in sort of micropops and the deeper edge?
Very good question. I think we're seeing an overall average of about 30% increase right now across every footprint. And back to your point about the supply chain, we're seeing customers get very creative in how they expect to deploy and anticipate those supply chain issues. But if your OTT providers and your cable providers are all screaming that 30% range, which is what they've all put out there into the media, we've already deployed about 230 megawatts, and we're 100% carbon neutral. So we're able to support our customers, thankfully, but we're seeing a roughly 30% demand. I think there's some pockets, at least in the U.S., where they're unable to reach the end users, and we're hearing that in North Carolina, like Nashville. Like, you're seeing some of these pockets that were not really your big metros become the new metros. So we're seeing them re-architect, and we're seeing them handle the demand, but it's been a pretty quick uptick in deploying. And thankfully our teams have been good enough to travel and have not been hurt by COVID so much. So we've been lucky, thank God.
And Andy, when you're choosing your landing stations and so on, how do you go about bringing together that convergence of proximity to the sea? Obviously, you've got to have proximity to the sea, but also proximity to the metro networks that you want to offer service to, or take service from, whichever way I guess you're looking at it, and also manage the power supply into those. What's the sort of decision-making process that you have to go through?
Yeah, thanks, Dom. I mean, it's a good question. Obviously, when we're looking at planning new cable systems, landing points are always critical pieces of that overall infrastructure, and it's always a challenge. It depends largely where you're landing and just how developed not just the landing point, but the country itself is. So, fortunately, in the US and Europe and the those types of developed regions, you don't have a power issue as such in terms of supply, but we're always careful around convergence of carrier density into a cable station, even though it's predominantly a cable station, so they tend to be not necessarily used for service delivery, but you still need access to all the regional POPs and local POPs in the areas, the data centers, but we also look for critical supply of power, diversity if possible, although that's always a challenge in terms of diverse supply. But then when you get into places, even though they are way up the chain in terms of development of developing countries, but places like Brazil, when you're on the coastline, power is a challenge. Just sourcing power is a challenge. Reliable power. On the coastline in Brazil, down in Sao Paulo where we land, and there's a bunch of other cables there too. There's about 4 or 5 cables land in the same rough area that we are now. We see brownouts every day. Every day, especially in the summer, in the afternoon, you can guarantee we're going to have 3 or 4 occasions where the power goes off, where the local utilities resetting the power. So it's not just a question of availability; it's also a question of resilience and quality of power. So when we're planning cable stations, where you're almost in a mode where you're planning for, I will have commercial power, but you're also building a station that is effectively every day running itself on generators and batteries and everything else. But to a point raised earlier, I think especially in places like Brazil and other developing telecoms infrastructure locations, just availability of power in what we call the mega data centers, the core data centers, not the edge, but Sao Paulo, Rio, those data center providers there, they struggle with providing power or upgrades to power, increases in power all the time. It's always a challenge. Space is not an issue largely. Power is always the issue in these places. So deploying new equipment, new space, especially for the CDN type and streaming type providers, is always challenging for them because they can get space, they can get connectivity, they can't always get the power that they need to actually deliver those applications.
That sounds like a good segue to come back to Lily and ask, as infrastructure providers start to introduce things like submarine landing stations and so on, what's the demand on a company like yours in terms of provisioning that supply? Is it a long lead time, or do you work with those providers to try to effectively co-locate in electrical terms with you? What's that process, and how difficult is it?
It's definitely good to partner with a manufacturer when it comes to places like that. You want to make sure you have the type of equipment. You want to make sure you partner on the lead time, but you also want to make sure you can service it. You want to work with a company that can get there, that can fix equipment, get to that equipment. So that's really a key too. It's not just having the availability of the power, availability of the equipment, but you also have to service it. One of the things we are seeing a big trend in is microgrids in these types of environments where power is not, doesn't have is not great. So what we do is we help customers with microgrids. So if you have, your UPSs, your generators, your PV, batteries, and now there's new technologies out there that are large lithium batteries that could keep you up and running for anywhere from 2, 4 or more hours. So what we do is we support our customers with microgrids and help them manage that power. And the nice part is we have a control center that you can control off-site and help that customer keep that power going. That's really important, is to make sure that not only do you have the power, but managing it, monitoring it, servicing it, keeping it up and running. And I know all these guys have to deal with that type of infrastructure.
Okay, so let me just gently step up a little level on the OSI network layering model, and let's actually start looking at access and core IP network capability. Felix, how's the ongoing shift in the subsea landscape with operators like Seaborn opening up more routes and so on impacting the underlying physical infrastructure and opening up the next generation of connectivity?
Yeah, well, I mean, good question, Dom. I think you're seeing a complete shift in subsea landscape, right? I mean, the old legacy subsea systems that were built between 1999 and 2004, they were all concentrated in one area. I mean, in the U.S. alone, a lot of the older subsystems still go through Lower Manhattan, and now you're starting to see all of these network operators of these subsea systems, these new subsea systems, look for diverse places to essentially place these cables, right? You're starting to see that here at NJFX, down in Virginia Beach with Maria and Brusa, and with these new subsea systems that are coming on board now. You're starting to see to Africa, right? I mean, that was just announced, and that's a major development in the subsea system. And you're starting to see where all of these operators are looking for new places to put these subsea cables to provide true diversity for international connectivity.
And Elsa, I think it's fair to say that today's internet architecture wasn't really designed for the complexity and volumes of traffic that we're seeing today. What do you think, looking forward, are the tips and tricks that you would give to people involved in content delivery to solve those network, I was going to call them network bottlenecks?
Good question. I think, what we've always done is just focus on our customers and what their needs are and collaborate with them. And if that means we're bringing in a discussion with, our OTT providers, our networks, as well as the CDN networks, they're all collaborating. They're building their own ecosystem, whether it's at the core or at the edge. They are needing their partners closer to them. So we collaborate closely with them, and we identify the locations and scale and the solutions that their businesses need. But at the same time, we're solving for the immediate needs right now, which is just to keep it up and running. But they are looking longer into that 5-year range now of what they need to build and how they need to architect. We don't know how we're going to need to architect this, and it's I don't know if this is our new normal or we're not going backwards, but everyone keeps saying the same thing, that we're needing a bigger, diverse, multi-directional network solution.
Perfect. And Andy, from your point of view, what do you think the next steps are going to be in moving the subsea fiber industry forwards and meeting these demands as more and more demand is placed on these networks and more and more sort of developed parts of the developing nations and so on come online with huge audiences?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, you look at somewhere like Brazil, which is, ranked in the top 3 for online gaming, Facebook media, streaming. It's a huge population, huge mobile population, heavily trafficked in terms of, streaming media, mobile content, social networking. I think what we've seen is a major shift. Is if you look at the traditional, what you might call IP transit network providers. So all the subsea cables fall in that bucket. We've all provided IP transit to predominantly serve local ISP markets. So you'd have a bunch of connectivity. For example, in Brazil, you connect to a bunch of different providers in Brazil to aggregate that ISP traffic. And then you might connect to, 3 or 4, at most, 3 or 4 tier 1 type IP providers in the US or Europe or wherever it might be, to give those ISP aggregators access to the general internet. What we're seeing now is and what we've been doing with our IP rollout, which only began last year, but what we've been seeing is a need for a two-sided approach to that. It's not just about delivering IP content to ISP customers in these regions. It's not just about getting them on the internet. It's about developing a network that supports streaming, CDN, gaming, all the more, not just bandwidth intensive, but latency intensive applications too. So rather than have, a pipe going down to a country like Brazil with a bunch of connections on the end of it, we're seeing now a move towards more of a barbell type scenario where you've got 20 or 30 transit providers connected in Brazil, and you've got 20 or 30 transit providers connected in the US, for example, for us, so that not only can users in Brazil access that, the internet, the content and everything else, but CDNs, streaming services, gaming platforms, they can come through a variety of different reasons to reach those eyeballs in those foreign countries. So they don't have to come through, 2 or 3 tier 1s. If they're already on a network in the US that's not one of those 2 or 3 that historically got connected to cable systems, they're now able to access through the IP at the IP layer rather than the physical layer. So that's a big change we see moving forward, is recognizing that it's not just about delivering. No longer is it just about delivering internet, broadly speaking. You're not just looking to provide web pages to users anymore. It's a totally different ecosystem there.
So we've got time for a couple of questions. Got about 5 minutes left for this session. So I have a question in on the chat room from Femi Dakabiri. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. It was directed at Felix, but feel free to step in if any of the other panelists have some comments here. How receptive or otherwise are cable owners at landing their cables in a multi-tenant CLS, multi-tenant co-location service or center?
Sorry, Dom, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, you had a question in from the floor on how receptive are, or otherwise, are cable owners at landing cables in multi-tenant co-location, CLS, but co-location centers, co-location service locations?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously these new cable operators are looking for places to land these cables, right, and reach a broad audience. So if you look at the new half-through AEC2 cable that's landing here at NJFX, Aquacomms has a wholesale model where they're basically have their cable coming into our facility, and now you have a multitude of backhaul providers that can bring all of their customers across that system. So yeah, I mean, all of these cable operators are looking for carrier neutral institutions and the ability to reach a much broader audience in regards to their system. So very receptive to this model.
Okay, and I'm not seeing an immediate jump for a more. Oh, sorry, Femi's just clarified CLS was cable landing station. So me forgetting my acronyms in the panic of what's going on in the room here today. Just a final question from me then. Oh, and Neil's asked a question, but I'll come to him in a second. So second from last question, but quick one from me. If any of you have any comments here, if you were going to make a recommendation sort of up the stack, particularly into the application space, about how to optimize the efficiency of the use of the cables that you're deploying or the power that your facilities are demanding and so on, would there be one area of focus that each of you would recommend? So if I could just buzz along the list and ask each of you if there's a particular change in direction or change in architecture that you think would result in better power efficiency or better network utilization. I'm going to start with Elsa.
I would recommend better density to accommodate you know, in some of these facilities. So you've still got some customers using only 5 kW per cab, but most of them are planning on getting up to the 8 and 10 based on some of the equipment. So the higher the density, the better the efficiency in the data center, especially for those of us that build high density. And we're looking for less than a 1.3 PUE is what we're striving for, 1.2.
Okay, perfect. Andy, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, one comment I'd have is, you know, network connectivity should not, and in most cases, is not a limiting factor in terms of deploying these networks. We found that with, even in at least to the major cities, you know, the edge is a totally different conversation. But what we see is, you know, the region that we're focused on down in South America is a tendency to go with the name you know best in terms of a data center location. And that tends to mean that all your eggs are in one basket, not just you, but every other CDN provider and every other streaming provider at the same time. And all that means is that you know, there's space, there's power, there's availability. There is network connectivity in these major metropolitan areas too, that just doesn't get used, doesn't get utilized. And you know, spread the, you know, we're starting to see it in places like Brazil now. But if you look around the rest of the region, you don't really see a tendency to spend time understanding what's in the local market before you go to your favorite data center provider and go, put me in your big building.
Yeah.
You know, there's plenty of other options where you can spread the load, in terms of power and connectivity, but also in terms of risk. You know, you don't want to have everybody sitting in the same building, even in places like Sao Paulo, which is very, you know, it's a very well-established, well-connected, well-managed data centers there, but things still happen, you know. But everybody, especially in South America, tends to have, here's my favorite data center, I'm going to put everything there. You know, it's a risk from a service level perspective, but it's also just, you know, it's just load, power, availability for others that need to be in there becomes a challenge.
Perfect. And Felix, any recommendations to the architects upstream from the exchange as to how they might better optimize their network utilization?
Yeah, I think Andy hit it right on the head. I mean, I agree 100%. The important thing is not to have all your eggs in one basket, right? And achieving that true diversity by being smart with your architectural framework. And in order for that to happen, these content delivery networks and these network providers are starting to understand and say, you know, how is my network truly orchestrated? And they're starting to see that, and having low latency direct routes is equally important. So yeah.
I have to take the mute off, don't I? It's my own time. So Lily, I think it seems appropriate to come to you for the last question there. So from your point of view, if you were going to recommend any key strategic changes in architecture for CDNs and content delivery platforms, what do you think would make the biggest difference in terms of their power consumption?
I think you have to make your facility resilient. Make sure it's, and as Andy and Felix mentioned, that you need to understand where your building is going into, what's available there, what kind of equipment and support you're going to need to get that up and running. Whether it's, you know, if the power is great, then you may need just a UPS and a generator. But if you're in an area where the power is not great, you might need a microgrid. You might need support to make sure that you reduce that downtime. So I think resiliency is the most important thing, is to make sure that your facility and your infrastructure is architected that way, whether it's N+1 or 2 when, it really is going to depend on where you are putting in and what you're trying to get out of it. And does the facility need to be up and running, you know, 100%? And there's some facilities who don't. So it's really dependent on what you want that facility to look like.
Perfect. So with some apologies to Anil, who I know has got a raised hand and a question, but we are back to back with lots of 30-minute sessions today, so we're not going to get to every question. But Anil, can I suggest you put the question into the chat room, and I'll ask the panel if they could just pop into the chat room and throw some comments back to your question there. That would be appreciated. My apologies for not bringing you on air this time, Anil. And I'd like to just quickly buzz along and say a big thank you. So Elsa, thank you very much. We'll see you
Thank you.
on today. Lily, thanks again. It's been
Thank
great.
you.
And Felix, I know you're there still somewhere.
Appreciate it, though. Yep.
See you soon. And Andy, again, thanks. And also thanks for sponsoring today.
Oh, my pleasure. Good to see you.
Great. We'll speak to you in the chat room or in the networking sessions a bit later.